So as I explained to you, we're going to look at a snapshot of a program called Partners in Leadership, and it's all about accountability. So let's get right into accountability. When do you hear someone say, who's accountable? When we hear that, what do we think first?
Leadership.
Okay, but do you think that it's about who's right or who's wrong when we say who's accountable?
I think who's wrong.
Probably who's wrong. And that's very often the way that a lot of employees are in business. It's, I did something wrong. And sometimes we look at accountability as looking back at something that we've done wrong. You don't very often hear someone walk into a room and say, now, I want to ask you, who's accountable for the success that we had this morning? Do we hear that? We'd love to say we do, but we don't hear that enough. And that makes a difference in how people function in organizations. The fact that accountability is thought of as something that happens when things go wrong, that drives behavior. It drives behavior that has an impact on how people work. And if you think about it, it could have an effect on the results that a company gets and maybe the initiative that's taken. Let's talk about that a little bit. Why would that be?
Well, it's a fear-based model.
A fear-based model, good.
Right. And often in that model, there's no way to succeed, you can only fail.
Uh-huh. Now, if there's fear, then what does that do to an idea that you might want to bring forward? Or something that you might want to try that's somewhat different? Would that have an impact?
I guess it'd make you less likely to be creative and take risks.
That's true. And that's the old definition of accountability. And a lot of organizations and a lot of the way we look at accountability is kind of more of a negative, like looking back on, justifying what happened. Today I'm going to introduce a more positive approach to accountability, a little bit of a different look. And we're going to look at the screen right here. I hope you can all see it. You have here a chart. We call this the steps, the accountability chart, and there's a line right in the middle. And what we have is what we call below the line and above the line. And below the line, what we do is we focus on why we didn't achieve a result. Who's to blame? When we work above the line, we are focusing on what are we going to do to get somewhere, to get the results we need. So below the line, we focus on what's out of our control. The excuses, why couldn't we get something done? Above the line, we're focusing on what's in our control. If it's in my control, what can I do to make the difference? So above the line, you're taking initiative. You feel very empowered. Below the line, you're frustrated, you are not getting the results you want, and you're looking at the reasons why, the excuses. So it's a very defeating place to come from, working below the line. And in organizations, we have big obstacles, and there are times when we tend to go below the line, we tend to look at why, what are the reasons, but if we stay there and we get stuck there, we don't achieve the results that we want. And I'm sure at Axiom Legal here, you have goals that you shoot for. And you might make them very specific and results that you go for each quarter or every year. What you want to do is achieve them. And what we'll talk about today is working above the line is where you'll be to achieve them. So it's very different. I want to ask you, thinking about Axiom Legal, where you work here, other organizations where you came from, did you work with people that you found stayed below the line a lot?
Sure. In team environments.
In team environments that you... Now, what effect did that have on getting the results in the organization?
Well, I think it was power and sometimes, lack of experience that kind of drove the behavior, but a lot of times it was like authority versus, people that felt coordinate.
Well, that's interesting. Do you think that only people, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Phil, but do you think people with experience, high-level CEOs, sometimes play this blame game and get stuck at blaming and looking
Yeah.
for...
Because they come from traditional settings, you know,
Mhm.
instead of the entrepreneurial, you know, kind of newer generation of company.
Now, this is more of an entrepreneurial setting. So where do you see yourselves here in this company? Do you feel that, can you see yourselves in both areas? Tell me where you are here.
Us individually or the company?
You can talk either way, whatever you like. Probably more as an organization I'm asking for right now.
Right. I'd say it's more above the line. And
Yeah.
the way I would measure that is when below the line, you can tell because you're spending a lot of your energy planning for how things might look later.
Mhm.
Meaning you're spending less of your energy doing the task. And I feel like there's not so much of that here.
Okay, that's good. And we'll talk a little bit about that because working below the line takes a lot of energy and it takes it away from getting the results that you want. I'm going to give you an example of what we're talking about. Two companies, both dealt with a tragedy which had impact on their business. The first company I'm going to give you an example of was Jack in the Box. Do you remember? Do you know Jack? I know there are Jack in the Boxes in New York, but there weren't a lot. Much more in the West Coast, I think. Do you recall a problem that Jack in the Box had? You do.
Salmonella, right?
It's E.
Not
coli.
E. coli. Yeah.
Some
See,
bacteria.
yeah. So, close enough, Jason.
Thank
Very
you.
good, Jason. Brought up well. Okay. Okay, so E. coli was the issue, actually, and you're absolutely right. It was E. coli in the hamburger meat, and it happened in 1993. So this is a while ago. You were quite young. But what happened was very significant because there were, from this, 4 deaths, I think, and hundreds of people became ill. Really serious. Now, Jack in the Box was looking for really who should take responsibility. And they didn't want to take the initial responsibility. They immediately pointed the finger at Vons Supermarket, which was the meat supplier. And then it started to go through a cycle of, well, it's the meat supplier, but then it's the inspectors, the meat inspectors that work for the meat supplier. And it just kind of went around at who can we point a finger at. Now, ultimately, they did do some, took steps to make changes to fix the problem. However, right away, at first, they were looking for who can take responsibility for this. Now, what do you think that impact had on the public? The guy that wants to go in and order a hamburger, are they going to go to Jack in the Box?
No.
No. And it really had a major impact on their revenues. In fact, it took them 7 years to recoup because they were working below the line. They were playing that blame game. Another good example, again, of a company with a tragic problem was with something that happened actually earlier, but I think you'll all know, and that was Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, right? In fact, this is in a business case studies on how well Johnson & Johnson took this problem, and what they did was they attacked it. They had a problem with cyanide, right, in the bottles of Tylenol, and it was in the Chicago market. In fact, I think it was in 5 stores in Chicago. Does anybody remember what happened, how Johnson & Johnson handled this? Yes.
Well, I don't know if this was recommended by their PR firm, but they did a massive recall, and it just sent the message that I don't care if it's just 5 locations, that we're going to recall everything. And it was very expensive for them, but the
Yes.
brand
Did
reputation.
they also redo their bottling?
And what did they do to
They
the bottling?
They put the plastic on so you knew if it was
Tamper.
Right,
tampered.
the tamper-proof seals, which what they did was they said to the public, we don't want this ever to happen again. So we have to take responsibility for this, pulling off all of the bottles across the whole country, which was a tremendous